What if your brain wasn't as logical as you think it is? What if beneath every rational choice, there's a quiet tug of war between two voices in your mind, each convinced it's the one in control? Hi, this is Peter, and welcome back to Books for Thoughts. This week, we're exploring how our minds really work and how understanding the invisible patterns of thought can help us see the world more clearly, make better choices, and live with a little more awareness. Today's book is a modern classic in understanding human behavior, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. It's not just a psychology book. It's a mirror showing us the shortcuts, biases, and blind spots that quietly shape every decision we make. Kahneman divides the mind into two systems, not places in the brain, but ways of thinking. System one is fast, automatic, emotional. It's the voice that finishes your sentences, jumps to conclusions, and tells you what feels obvious. It's what recognizes a face in a crowd or hits the brakes before your mind has time to think. System two is slower, deliberate, analytical. It's what steps in when you're solving a problem, checking your math, or questioning your assumptions. System one gives speed. System two gives depth. Together, they help us survive and succeed. But the problem is, we think we're using System 2 far more often than we actually are. Most of the time, we're not thinking, we're reacting. Here's the uncomfortable truth Kahneman reveals. We're all predictably irrational. We believe we're logical, but our brains are wired for speed, not accuracy. When System 1 feels confident, System 2 goes quiet, and that's when the mistakes happen. You buy a product because it feels right. You trust someone because they seem confident. You assume a headline is true because it sounds familiar. That's the illusion of rationality. Your mind taking shortcuts to save effort. It's not stupidity, it's efficiency. But in the modern world where decisions are complex and subtle, those shortcuts often lead us astray. Kahneman says our brains evolved for survival, not for truth. We're wired to jump to conclusions because hesitation once meant danger. And so, even in the boardroom or on our phone screens, we still carry the instincts of a hunter in the savannah. One of Kahneman's most fascinating insights is how confidence often replaces accuracy. People who know less tend to believe more in their own opinions. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and you see it everywhere. In arguments, in politics, even in personal relationships. The ones who sound the most certain aren't always the ones who are most right. Kahneman suggests humility as a thinking tool. When something feels absolutely obvious, pause. That feeling of clarity might be System 1 speaking, and System 1 is charming, but not always right. Real wisdom lives in the space between the impulse and the evaluation, in the courage to say, I might be wrong. Our brains love stories so much that we invent them constantly. We see patterns where none exist, and we assign meaning to coincidences. That's why gamblers think they're due for a win. Why we see faces in clouds. Why we believe success is always earned and failure is always deserved. Kahneman calls this the narrative fallacy. We connect dots because it feels better than admitting randomness. We crave order even when the truth is messy and uncertain. But here's the twist. Awareness doesn't eliminate bias. It just gives us the grace to notice it. And maybe to think a little slower. Before we decide what the world means, if there's one bias that shapes more of our choices than we realize, it's the fear of losing. Kahneman calls it loss aversion. The idea that losing something hurts twice as much as gaining it feels good. You can see it in markets, in relationships, in the way people cling to what's familiar, even when it no longer serves them. We overvalue what we already have, a job, a belief, a plan. Not because it's best, but because letting go feels like pain. Our brains are built to protect what's ours, even if that means staying stuck instead of risking something new. The irony? the people who seem fearless, aren't the ones without doubt. They're just the ones who've learned that losing isn't the end of the story. Now, here's a fascinating thing. Your decisions don't just depend on what you see, but how it's presented. Kahneman calls this the framing effect. Tell someone a surgery has a 90% survival rate, and they'll feel hopeful. Tell them it has a 10% chance of death, and they'll hesitate. Same numbers, different frame, different emotion. Our brains respond not to logic, but to stories, to the shape of the information we're given. That's why marketing works. That's why persuasion works. And that's why clarity, true clarity, requires slowing down long enough to see through the frame. Because behind every argument, every statistic, every opinion is a choice in how it's told. And wisdom begins when you start noticing the frame before reacting to the picture inside it. System two, our slow, logical brain, is powerful, but it's also lazy. Kahneman says it follows the path of least effort. It steps in only when it must, which means for most of our lives, System 1 is in charge, making fast emotional judgments and letting System 2 justify them afterward. You don't decide what you believe. You feel it first, then build logic around the feeling. That's not a flaw. That's human. But awareness helps. The moment you realize your reasoning might just be your emotion in disguise, you've already taken a step toward truth. After reading Kahneman, it's tempting to distrust intuition entirely. But that's not what he's asking of us. He's reminding us that intuition is a tool, not a master. It's powerful when trained, when rooted in experience and humility. A firefighter who senses danger in a burning building isn't lucky. His intuition is pattern recognition, shaped by years of learning. But unchecked intuition, the kind that rushes, assumes, and simplifies, can lead us astray. The lesson is not to silence it, but to listen with awareness, to let intuition speak and reason translate. Kahneman's work isn't about thinking harder, it's about thinking wiser. It's about noticing the little moments. When your mind jumps too quickly, or your confidence feels too certain, or your fear feels too heavy. Because in that pause, between reaction and reflection, lives the freedom to choose differently. Thinking slowly isn't about delay, it's about presence. It's the quiet art of knowing when to trust your gut and when to question it. So the next time you feel that rush to decide, breathe. You might be standing right at the edge between System 1 and System 2, between impulse and insight, and in that small pause lies the space where real wisdom begins.